What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, big bantamweight matchup coming up in a couple of weeks. We have Cory Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. I think this is going to be probably the highest display of MMA skill that you're going to see this summer. And I certainly think the winner is going to be on the short list for the next title challenger. I want to do a predictions. I want to break this fight down and pick who you think is going to win. So tell me what you think about this fight.
Man, I love this fight. And everybody knows just how good Cory Sandhagen is. He's one of the most dynamic strikers in one of the most difficult and intense divisions that the UFC's ever had. And the same thing can be said for Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, when you see the last name Nurmagomedov, you automatically think, oh, this is going to be a striker versus grappler match. But Umar and the rest of these new guys coming out of Team Khabib and out of Dagestan are much more than just grappling heavy MMA fighters that use the cage, get you down, and beat you up on the bottom. They can still all do that very well, but a lot of them have come in with some super dynamic striking, some kicking that looks like they did, 2 decades worth of karate, some lethal striking with their hands, a lot of power, and they aren't really afraid of a takedown attempt because they're so lethal on the ground that they're able to just let their hands and feet go on the feet, which makes them very, very dangerous opponents for almost anybody. But if there's one thing that you can always rely on if you're trying to beat somebody who's so good everywhere is unpredictability. And there might not be a more unpredictable fighter in the entire UFC than Cory Sandhagen.
Yeah, very well said. And when you see that last name, Nurmagomedov, you do think grappler, but that doesn't tell the whole story because we saw in his last fight, he's got one punch KO power.
Right.
And as you said, some kicks that come from awkward angles. He's very dangerous with that as well. He is very good at using range. He can hit you when you seem to think that you might be out of range. He's still landing and still striking. And of course, mixing in the wrestling takedowns. That's a given. Same thing can be said for Cory Sandhagen. He's a super dynamic striker, and everybody kind of knows him as that. But Cory Sandhagen can wrestle with the best of them. He can scramble with the best of them. He can get up if he's taken down. He's very tall and rangy for the division. I think both of these guys are extremely good and extremely buttoned up in all facets of the game. Now, that said, I think it's Umar's time. I think Umar Nurmagomedov is the next uncrowned champion of the UFC. I think he's going to make his way through the 135 division. I am predicting a late stoppage against Cory Sandhagen. I think it's going to come via submission. I think it's going to be very competitive on the feet for a couple of rounds, and Umar's going to eventually start to land his shots, which is going to open up the takedowns. We're going to see some either ground and pound that leads to a finish or just a straight up submission, head and arm triangle. Maybe he takes Cory's back and gets a rear naked choke or something like that. That's kind of the way I'm seeing it going. But make no mistake, a win, especially a finish over Cory Sandhagen, makes you the number one contender at bantamweight. No matter how easy Umar makes it look, that is not an easy fight. And if you can beat the Sandman, you deserve a title shot.
I totally agree. And ever since we saw the name Nurmagomedov enter the bantamweight division, and as it sits right now, there's 2 of them, but Umar in particular, we've been keeping an eye on. You were like, okay, well, it's only a matter of time before this guy strings together some ridiculous win streak. And of course he did that. And we're like, okay, so now that he's reached the rankings, it's only a matter of time before he climbs his way into the top, the big boys league. That's where Cory Sandhagen has been for several years now. And he's been fighting the best fighters at bantamweight for years, and he's been beating everybody else that is basically ranked below him. But I do find this to be a very difficult fight for Cory Sandhagen. Umar is just so good everywhere. Watch out for those body kicks. When Umar starts kicking a lot, you really have to watch out because he sends so much power with those because he's not afraid of fighters grabbing his legs and transitioning it into some form of a takedown. He can just let them go and basically do damage even if the kick gets blocked or the strike gets blocked, because you're not going to want to engage in a grappling match with Nurmagomedov. I think that he comes out and he's able to do what he wants on the ground with Cory Sandhagen, which is going to force Cory to stand with him. And I think that the speed of Nurmagomedov is actually going to be something that catches Cory Sandhagen off guard. When you look at Umar Nurmagomedov, you're looking at a guy who has the skills to be the champion at the bantamweight division right now. But he still has to do a little bit of heavy lifting, and I think this is the perfect next test for him. And it's really cool to see the bantamweight division remain so stacked while there's so many changing of the guards happening, right? You got Aljamain Sterling moving up to 45 after this next title fight against Suga. Suga just jumped the line with that win over Peter Yan. And then you've got, with the TJ Dillashaw retirement and a couple other people, weaning themselves out of the top of the division, you've got just as stacked of a division, a top 5, but a whole new list of names.
Yeah, definitely some new faces for sure. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens a couple weeks after this fight, because that's when Aljo is going to take on Sugar Sean. And as you said, Aljo is going to move up to 145 after this. Whether that's a good decision or not for Aljo is yet to be determined. But if Aljo wins, it's likely vacated. And then probably what will happen, my prediction as to what will happen, is they're going to put Merab versus the winner of Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov. And I think it's going to be Nurmagomedov. Could you imagine Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov for the undisputed belt? One of the best fights you could possibly ask for. If Sugar does happen to upset Sterling, and I do believe it would be an upset. I think it's a winnable fight for Sean O'Malley, but I think it's a fight. It's an uphill battle, that's for sure. I'll say, to say the least. And so, if Sugar's able to win that fight, talk about the name recognition and O'Malley versus Nurmagomedov for the belt. That's a huge fight. It's a mega fight. Tough fight for O'Malley, but still a very sellable, very marketable fight. So I love what's happening at bantamweight right now. I think there's nothing but good fights. There's nothing but ultra hard fights for everybody who's in the top 5. There's no ducking in that division. There's no cherry picking opponents, because every single one of them is like, oh, you don't want Umar? Well, how about Merab?
Right.
Oh, you don't want Merab? Well, how about Sterling? You know what I mean? It's just, how about Sandhagen? You know, there is no easy fight at bantamweight for anybody who's in the top 5 or even the top 10 at that matter.
I totally agree. It's very much, if you jump out of the frying pan of bantamweight, you're landing right into the fire at bantamweight. These guys are all the pinnacle of mixed martial arts at this current stage of the sport, and I can't wait to see these matchups take place, however they end up shaking out. I believe Sugar Sean has some of the most dynamic striking in the entire UFC, and he is without a doubt a superstar. And you have to start looking for fighters like him to get big fights while they're, potentially the champion. And when you have a name like Nurmagomedov in your division, it really does mean something, because Team Khabib is massive. If you go around the world and look at how big of a star Khabib is, it's really mind-blowing. And I think that he's doing so many good things for his team, for his family members, for his brothers, to make their own name in this sport. And I really do feel that bantamweight's just on the cusp of having some major, major fights.
Me too.